Assassination. My assassination. And they intended to frame Demon for it, using it as justification for Alpha Ronan to challenge his rule. Vivian had sent me here expecting me to die. But she'd actually sent me into the middle of a larger conspiracy, one that involved multiple packs working together to destabilize Demon's reign. I was never meant to be a bride. I was meant to be a weapon, one that would explode and take the Alpha King's reputation with it. Find something interesting? I spun around, my heart in my throat. Demon stood in the doorway, his amber eyes reflecting the dim candlelight. He was dressed in simple sleep clothes, and his scarred face was unreadable. I can explain, I started. He held up a hand, silencing me. Then he limped into the room, closing the door behind him. What are you doing here, Maya? I could have lied. Should have lied. But something in his eyes made me choose truth. Looking for answers, I said. I overheard the guards talking about the Crimson Fang delegation, and something felt wrong. So I gestured helplessly at the scattered documents. Broke into my administrative office to investigate on your own, he finished, a strange note in his voice. Yes, I admitted, waiting for his anger. Instead, he surprised me. What did you find? I handed him the letter with shaking hands. He read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked at me with something like wonder. You just saved my life, he said quietly, and possibly prevented a civil war. I don't understand, I whispered. Demon moved to the window, staring out at the lightning sky. The Crimson Fang pack has been looking for an excuse to challenge my rule for years. If you had been killed while under my protection, especially as an innocent bride sent by another alpha, it would have given them the political justification they needed. Other packs would have rallied to their cause. The territories would have split apart again. I made my way to the administrative wing, where records and correspondence were kept. The door was locked, but growing up in a house where I wasn't wanted had taught me useful skills. I'd learned to pick simple locks by the time I was 12, sneaking into the library for books when I wasn't supposed to be reading. The administrative office was organized but cluttered with documents. I began searching carefully, not sure what I was looking for but trusting my instincts. Most of it was routine supply orders, patrol schedules, messages from allied packs. Then I found it. Tucked under a stack of old tax records was a letter. The wax seal had been broken, but I could see it bore the mark of the Moonstone pack. My pack. My father's pack. With shaking hands, I unfolded it and began to read. Alpha King Demon. I write to inform you of an unfortunate deception. The girl sent to you as my daughter Arabella is, in fact, an imposter. Her name is Maya, my daughter from my first marriage, and she was sent without my knowledge or consent by my current wife. I apologize for this insult to your honor. I ask that you return the girl to my custody, where she will be properly punished for her deception. In her place, I will send my true daughter Arabella, as originally agreed. Alpha Marcus Thornfield. Moonstone Pack. The letter was dated 2 days after I'd left home. My father, or more likely Vivian writing in his name, was already trying to reclaim control of the situation. But it was the notation at the bottom in different handwriting that made my blood run cold. Message intercepted. Do not deliver to King. Proceed as planned. When the southern girl is eliminated, blame will fall on the King's neglect. Alpha Ronan sends his regards. I stood frozen in the dark office, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't just about a forged letter requesting Crimson Fang warriors. This was about a plan. Garrett, his second-in-command, was reporting on border patrols when he mentioned, the delegation from Crimson Fang arrives tomorrow. 20 warriors as requested. As requested? Demon's voice was sharp. I sent no such request. The table fell silent. Garrett frowned, pulling out a rolled parchment. We received this message 3 days ago. Bearing your seal. Requesting a diplomatic escort from Alpha Ronan. Demon took the parchment, his scarred face darkening as he read. This is not my writing. And this seal. He held it up to the torchlight. It's close, but the wolf's head is facing the wrong direction. This is a forgery. A ripple of tension spread through the room. If someone was forging the Alpha King's communications, it meant conspiracy. It meant betrayal. Double the guard, Demon ordered, his voice cold and controlled. When the Crimson Fang warriors arrive, they are to be kept under watch at all times. No one moves through this fortress without my knowledge. As the meeting continued, I felt Demon's amber eyes slide to me, just for a moment. There was something in his gaze, not suspicion but concern. He was worried about my safety, and that made me realize something. I was worried about his discovery of the conspiracy. I couldn't sleep that night. The conversation in the hall had awakened something in me. A need to understand what was happening. I wasn't some sheltered southern princess anymore. I was living in the Alpha King's fortress, under his protection, and dangerous things were moving in the shadows. I needed to know what they were. In the early hours before dawn, I slipped out of my quarters wearing a simple dark dress. The fortress was quieter at this hour, with only night guards making their rounds. I'd learned their patterns over the past week. There was a 10-minute gap when they switched positions. Like he's always carrying the weight of the world. The old woman at the border told me about his father, I said quietly. About the assassination. Sarah nodded grimly. It broke something in him. He was just a boy and he watched his father die. Then he had to become a king overnight and fight a war to unite the packs. He's never had a chance to be anything but a warrior and a ruler. I thought about that often. Demon and I were more similar than I'd realized. Both of us had lost our chance at normal lives. Both of us had been forced into roles we never asked for. Both of us carried scars, his visible, mine hidden. Whispers in the corridors. It was on my 10th day at Shadow Peak that I first sensed something was wrong. I'd been exploring the fortress library, a magnificent room filled with books and scrolls from every pack territory. As I reached for a volume on Northern history, I overheard two guards talking in the corridor outside. Arriving tomorrow, one said in a low voice. From the Crimson Fang pack. Why would Alpha Ronin send his warriors here now? The other replied. The treaty negotiations aren't for another month. Don't know. But Commander Garrett doesn't trust it. He's doubling the patrols. Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving me standing in the library with a book in my hands and worry in my heart. The Crimson Fang pack. I knew that name. They were one of the packs that had resisted Demon's rule the longest, finally submitting only 5 years ago after a brutal battle. There was no love lost between them and Shadow Peak. That evening, I attended dinner in the Great Hall. It was the first time I'd been invited to eat with the king and his inner circle rather than in my quarters. I was seated at the long table, surrounded by Demon's most trusted warriors and advisors. Demon himself sat at the head, his presence commanding even in silence. He was always busy, meeting with his council, training with his warriors, dealing with disputes between packs. When I did catch glimpses of him, it was from a distance. He would be crossing a courtyard or speaking with his advisors, always surrounded by people, always working. The pack members of Shadow Peak were wary of me at first. They knew I'd come from the south, and they knew the king had been sent multiple potential brides from different packs. There were whispers about why he'd chosen me, the girl who wasn't even supposed to be here. But Demon's protection was absolute. When a pack warrior made a dismissive comment about the southern substitute within earshot, Demon had him running laps around the entire fortress wall until he collapsed. The message was clear. Disrespect to me was disrespect to the king himself. Slowly, the pack began to accept my presence, if not fully trust me. My only real friend during those early days was a young woman named Sarah, one of the healers. She was close to my age, with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. She'd sought me out after my 3rd day in the fortress, bringing herbs for tea. You looked lonely, she'd said simply. And everyone needs at least one friend in a new place. Through Sarah, I learned about life in Shadow Peak. The pack valued strength and loyalty above all else. Demon ruled with strict fairness, harsh punishments for betrayal or cruelty, but protection and prosperity for those who served him well. He transformed the Northern Territories from a war-torn wasteland into the most powerful and stable region in all the Wolf Lands. He never smiles, Sarah told me one afternoon as we walked through the fortress gardens, a surprisingly beautiful space tucked against the southern wall. I've served here for 5 years, and I've never seen him truly happy. Just focused. Life in the Shadow Palace. The Luna's quarters were more luxurious than any room I'd ever seen, let alone lived in. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in furs and silks the color of midnight. A fireplace large enough to stand in kept the room warm despite the northern cold. There were bookshelves, a writing desk, a private bathing room with a copper tub, and windows that overlooked the pine forest stretching endlessly toward the horizon. After 9 years of sleeping in a servant's room barely large enough for a cot, this felt like a dream. Servants, real servants, not me for once, arrived with hot water for a bath, trays of food, and trunks full of clothing. They treated me with respect, calling me my lady, and bowing when they entered. It was surreal and overwhelming. That first night, I soaked in the copper tub until the water grew cold, washing away years of dirt and exhaustion. I ate until my stomach ached, tasting foods I'd only served to others. And then I lay in that enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. Demon had accepted me. Not only accepted me, but offered his protection. Why? He owed me nothing. I was a fraud, a substitute, a girl who'd been thrown away by her own family. Yet he'd looked at me like I mattered. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was filled with confusing dreams of amber eyes and scarred hands. The king's strange mercy. Over the next few days, I began to understand the strange dynamic of my new life. I was given the title of the king's intended, which meant I had status and protection, but I wasn't yet his mate. I could move freely through the fortress, attend meals, and access nearly any area except the king's private chambers and the war room. But I almost never saw Demon himself. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. This was it. He would send me back in disgrace, and Vivian would make good on her threat to cast me out. But Demon surprised me. He reached out and lifted my chin with one scarred hand, forcing me to meet his eyes. "What's your real name?" he asked. "Maya," I whispered, tears finally breaking free. "My name is Maya Thornfield. I'm Alpha Marcus's daughter from his first wife. But his new wife, she wanted to protect her own daughter. So they sent me instead." Anger flashed across his scarred face, and for a moment, I thought it was directed at me. But then he spoke and I realized the truth. "They sent you as a sacrifice," he growled, his voice filled with rage. "They treated you as disposable." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Demon was silent for a long moment. Then, to my absolute shock, he released my chin and stepped back. "Garrett," he called, and his second-in-command stepped forward. "Show Maya to the Luna's quarters. See that she has everything she needs. Food, clothing, comfort." "Your Majesty?" Garrett sounded as confused as I felt. Demon's amber eyes locked with mine, and something passed between us. Understanding, perhaps. Or recognition. Two people who had been broken by betrayal, standing in the ruins of other people's choices. "The Moonstone Pack sent me a bride," Demon said, his voice carrying through the throne room. "And a bride I shall accept. Let it be known that Maya Thornfield is under my protection. Anyone who harms her or disrespects her will answer to me personally." He turned back to me, and his expression softened just slightly. "You were sent here as a pawn in someone else's game, Maya. But you are not a pawn anymore. You are under the protection of the Alpha King. And I promise you this, those who betrayed you will regret their choices." As Garrett led me away, my mind reeled. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a throne made of black stone and silver. And on that throne sat the Alpha King, Demon Shadowfang. He was not what I expected. The stories had made him sound like a twisted, broken creature. But the man before me was powerful and commanding. He was tall, I could tell even though he was seated, with broad shoulders and a warrior's build. His black hair was slightly long, falling to his collar. And yes, he had scars. A network of them ran down the left side of his face, from his temple to his jaw, pulling slightly at his features. But they didn't make him hideous. They made him look dangerous, battle-tested, real. His eyes were the most striking thing about him. They were a piercing amber color, like a wolf's eyes, and they seemed to see everything. As I walked forward, those eyes tracked my every movement. I stopped at the base of the platform and performed my best curtsy, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Your Majesty," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I am Arabella Thornfield, daughter of Alpha Marcus of the Moonstone Pack. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Demon rose from his throne, and I saw that he moved with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. But even with that imperfection, he descended the steps with the grace of a predator. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He didn't speak. He simply stared at me, those amber eyes searching my face. Then he did something I didn't expect. He leaned in close and inhaled deeply, scenting me the way wolves do. His expression darkened. "You lie," he said softly, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through my chest. My blood turned to ice. "Your Majesty, you're not Alpha Marcus's true daughter," he continued, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "I can smell the deception on you, the fear, the resignation. You were sent here against your will. He united the territories and created the peace we have now. But the cost was high, and it changed him." I absorbed this information, my fear mixing with something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or understanding. This wasn't a monster who enjoyed cruelty. This was a man forged by tragedy and violence into something harder than steel. "Why is he looking for a bride now?" I asked. The elder's expression grew serious. "Because every king needs an heir. And because perhaps after 15 years of ruling alone, he's finally ready to let someone see the man beneath the crown." First meeting with the Beast King. On the 7th day we arrived at Shadow Peak. The fortress was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It rose from the mountainside like a natural part of the rock itself, all black stone and sharp towers reaching toward the gray sky. Massive walls surrounded it, and guards in black armor patrolled the battlements. This wasn't just a pack house. This was a military stronghold built to withstand any attack. The carriage passed through 3 different gates, each one more secure than the last, before finally stopping in a vast courtyard. My legs were shaky as Garrett helped me down. The cold here was bitter, cutting through my cloak like knives. "The king will see you immediately," Garrett said, leading me toward the main entrance. Inside, the fortress was warmer but no less intimidating. The corridors were wide and high-ceilinged, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. We passed guards who stood at attention, servants who bowed their heads, and pack members who stopped to stare at the newcomer. We reached a set of massive double doors carved with images of wolves in battle. Garrett knocked once and a deep voice from within said, "Enter." The doors swung open, and I stepped into the throne room. It was enormous, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Through mountain passes where the wind howled like wounded wolves, and across frozen rivers that cracked ominously beneath our wheels. The further north we went, the colder it became, and the more hostile the landscape. Garrett and his warriors barely spoke to me. I was cargo to them, valuable but not worth befriending. At night, we stopped at small pack settlements, and I was given private rooms in local pack houses. The pack members would stare at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. They knew where I was going and why. On the 5th night, we stayed at a settlement right at the border of the Northern Territories. The pack's elder, an old woman with white hair and knowing eyes, brought me tea. "You're going to the Shadow Peak," she said softly, not a question but a statement. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "You're afraid of the Alpha King," she continued. "Everyone seems to be," I replied quietly. She smiled, a strange, sad expression. "They fear what they don't understand. King Demon is not like other alphas. The war that scarred his body also scarred his soul. But scars aren't always signs of weakness, child. Sometimes they're proof of survival." "What was the war?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about the man I was being forced to marry. 15 years ago, the packs were not united. They fought each other constantly, tearing the territories apart. Demon's father, the previous Alpha King, tried to create peace, but rival packs assassinated him. Young Demon was only 17 when he witnessed his father's murder. He was badly wounded trying to protect him. That's how he got his scars. The old woman took a sip of her own tea. Everyone thought the boy would die, or that he'd be too weak to rule. But he survived. And over the next 5 years, he brought every single rebellious pack to heel, by force when necessary, by diplomacy when possible. Isabella avoided me completely, guilt written across her face whenever we passed in the hallway. Vivian supervised every detail, making sure I understood my story. I was Arabella Thornfield, beloved daughter of Alpha Marcus, educated and refined, being sent north as an honor to my pack. It was all lies, but I memorized every word. On the morning of my departure, a convoy of warriors from the Northern Territories arrived. They wore black armor with the symbol of a silver wolf's head, the mark of the Shadow Peak pack. Their leader was a massive man named Garrett, with scars across his face and cold gray eyes. "We're here for the Alpha's daughter," he announced to my father. I was brought forward, dressed in a deep blue traveling cloak, my hair properly styled for the first time in years. I looked like nobility. I felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. "This is my daughter, Arabella," my father said, the lie coming easily from his lips. "I trust she will be well protected on the journey." Garrett's eyes scanned me, and I felt like he could see right through the deception. But he simply nodded. "The Alpha King's future bride will be guarded with our lives." I was helped into an enclosed carriage, the door closing with a final terrible sound. Through the window, I saw my father standing with Vivian and Isabella. My stepmother looked triumphant. My stepsister looked relieved. My father looked away. As the carriage rolled forward, taking me away from the only home I'd ever known, I made myself a promise. I didn't know what waited for me in the north, but I would survive. I would find a way to survive. And someday, somehow, the people who had betrayed me would pay for what they'd done. Journey to the Dark Kingdom. The journey north took 7 long days. We traveled through forests that grew darker and denser. I turned to my father, desperate. "Father, I'm your daughter. Your blood. How can you do this to me?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw pain flash across his face. But then Vivian's hand squeezed his shoulder, and his expression hardened. "The decision is made, Maya. You'll leave in 3 days. You'll be presented as Arabella Thornfield, Alpha Marcus's firstborn daughter. No one in the Northern Territories knows what my daughters look like. You'll say nothing to contradict this. Do you understand?" Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. "And if I refuse?" Vivian's smile turned cruel. "Then I'll make sure your father disowns you completely. You'll be cast out of the pack as a rogue wolf with no protection, no home and no hope of survival. Winter is coming, Maya. How long do you think you'd last alone in the wilderness?" I was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. I could either go north to marry a monster, or be thrown out to die alone. Some choice. "I understand," I whispered, my voice broken. "Excellent," Vivian said brightly. "We'll have the seamstresses prepare appropriate clothing for you. You'll need to look like an Alpha's daughter after all. Can't have you showing up in rags and embarrassing us." As I turned to leave, my father called out softly, "Maya." I paused but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," he said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't save me from the fate they'd chosen for me. Sold to the scarred Alpha. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Seamstresses descended on the house, taking my measurements and creating traveling clothes fit for an Alpha's daughter. For the first time in years, I wore fine fabrics and leather boots that actually fit properly. But every beautiful piece of clothing felt like a costume for my execution. The Alpha King has demanded that each of the 7 great packs present their Alpha's firstborn daughter as a potential mate. My father continued, his voice heavy. He will choose one to become his Luna Queen and unite the territories. Isabella let out a small sob. "Father, no. Please, you can't send me to that monster." Vivian immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Marcus, you cannot do this to our Isabella. She's too delicate, too refined for such a brutal place. That king is a savage. He'll destroy her." I stood frozen by the door, saying nothing. This wasn't about me. It never was. My father ran his hands through his graying hair, looking defeated. "What choice do I have? If I refuse, he could declare war on our pack. We would be destroyed." "There is another option," Vivian said slowly, and the way her eyes slid to me made ice form in my veins. "The decree says the Alpha's firstborn daughter must be presented. Maya is technically your firstborn." The room fell silent. My father's eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw shame but also resignation. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Father, please." Stepmother's wicked plan. Vivian moved toward me like a predator stalking prey. "Maya dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this is a wonderful opportunity for you. You'll be a queen. Imagine that, you, the girl who scrubs our floors, becoming the Luna Queen of all the territories." "She would be marrying a monster," I said, my voice shaking. "You just said he would destroy Isabella. But you'll send me instead." "You're stronger than Isabella," Vivian replied smoothly. "You've always been so resilient. And really, what future do you have here? This way, you'll actually be useful to your family." I dressed in my simple gray dress, the fabric worn thin from years of use, and began my morning duties. The grand house needed to be spotless before the family woke. As I carried water buckets up the stairs, my arms aching, I caught my reflection in one of the polished mirrors that lined the hallway. I barely recognized myself anymore. My once bright green eyes looked tired. My dark brown hair, which my mother used to brush lovingly, was pulled back in a simple braid. My hands were rough from work. I was 19 years old, and I looked like a woman of 30 worn down by endless labor and heartbreak. "Maya!" Vivian's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. She stood at the top of the stairs in her silk robe, her cold blue eyes scanning me with disgust. "The Alpha wants to see you in his study immediately. And for heaven's sake, try to look presentable." My heart sank. Being summoned to my father's study was never good news. I quickly washed my face and hands, changed into my least worn dress, and made my way to the heavy oak doors of his office. I knocked softly. "Enter," came my father's voice, and I stepped inside. The cruel announcement. The study was exactly as I remembered from childhood, lined with books and maps, a fire crackling in the hearth. But my father looked different. Older. Tired. He sat behind his massive desk, and standing beside him was Vivian, her hand possessively on his shoulder. Isabella sat in a velvet chair, looking worried. "Maya," my father began, not meeting my eyes, "there has been a decree from the Northern Territories." My stomach twisted with fear. Decrees from the North only meant one thing. Alpha King Demon Shadowfang. He was the supreme ruler of all wolf packs. A legend whispered about in fear and awe. They said he was a monster who had been horribly scarred in a great war. They said he killed without mercy and ruled from a fortress of black stone. They said he was looking for a bride. The unwanted daughter. My name is Maya Thornfield, and I learned very early that blood doesn't always mean family. My mother died when I was 7 years old, leaving me in the care of my father, Alpha Marcus of the Moonstone Pack. For 3 beautiful years it was just the two of us. He would read me stories every night, teach me to track in the forest, and tell me I was his little warrior princess. Then everything changed. When I turned 10, my father remarried. Vivian Blackwell swept into our lives like a beautiful storm, bringing her daughter Isabella with her. Isabella was my age, with golden hair that caught the sunlight and a smile that could charm anyone. Within months, I became invisible in my own home. My father, once so loving, grew distant. Vivian whispered poison in his ears during their private moments. She convinced him that I was wild, undisciplined, and needed strict correction. My warm bedroom was moved to a small room in the servants' quarters. My fine dresses were given to Isabella. My place at the dinner table was moved further and further from my father's side until I was eating in the kitchen with the staff. By the time I turned 15, I was no longer treated as the Alpha's daughter. I was treated as help. I scrubbed floors that Isabella walked across without a second glance. I washed dishes after family meals I wasn't invited to attend. I mended clothes I would never be allowed to wear. The pack members who had once smiled at me now looked away in embarrassment or pity. A birthday without celebration. The morning of my 19th birthday arrived with no fanfare. I woke before dawn in my tiny room, the winter cold seeping through the thin walls. There would be no party, no cake, no gifts. There hadn't been for 9 years. Isabella's birthdays were grand celebrations with the entire pack invited. Mine passed in silence.